Hey everybody, welcome back to Planet Coaster. It's been a while since I last made a video, but I thought that due to recent events that I could make a new video, so here we are. Although, actually, this video is a few months old. I have to be honest, I recorded this somewhere at the start of the lockdown, and due to all kinds of circumstances, I just haven't released it until now, which is the day that I'm putting out this video, but as I am saying this, I'm not even sure if I believe myself that it's gonna come out soon, because this video has gone through so many ups and downs. Just to give you a quick update, because it's also a sort of a life update, I recorded this somewhere in the middle of lockdown when I was just spending all of my time inside on Discord trying to avoid cabin fever, and I just wanted to have a small side project in Planet Coaster, so this will just be a quick one and done kind of thing, which honestly I am kind of starting to enjoy. And I just had the time-lapse laying on my computer for a while until I finally decided to record commentary for it, which I lost somewhere along the way. Later I tried to get back into it, record some cinematics. I really liked those cinematics, but I deleted them because I accidentally recorded them into a Planet Zoo folder, and recently when I was cleaning up my hard drive, I found these recordings in the Planet Zoo folder. I figured I've released all of my Planet Zoo raw files, so it should be fine, deleted them, and now just realized that I threw away part of this project. Kind of unfortunate, and then I lost most of my motivation for this as well. But today, my 3 terabyte hard drive that I record videos on is completely full, and I need to get some stuff out there. And since this has been sitting for so long, I want to get this out of the way quick. Also, honestly, I have been recording things the past couple weeks. I know the past months, honestly, I've been kind of inactive on YouTube. Partly that is because I've just been really busy with school, writing my thesis and everything, and moving back to the Netherlands where I'm once again living. But also, honestly, I just haven't turned most of my footage actually into videos, so I just need to start working away at that and actually editing stuff. So that's just a quick life update. Now about this video itself, actually, the inspiration for this actually very much came from the lockdown as well, because as I would do, I was on Discord with some friends discussing gravity group wooden coasters and looking at POVs and things like this, when I realized that I really wanted to try my hand at one of these as well. And not just a wooden coaster in general, but a very particular type of gravity group wooden coasters, which isn't really officially a type, but it's definitely some kind of archetype that you see popping up recently. I'm talking about wooden roller coasters that are somewhere between 10 and 20 meters in height, have very short trains of about 6 or 5 cars, and tend to focus on airtime and stay very close to the ground in their layouts, and feature lots of bunny hops and quick changes in direction. And I would say this is very much a gravity group specialty. I think there are some interesting examples in the US of these kinds of coasters, like Kentucky Flyer in Kentucky Kingdom, and of course Oscar's Wacky Taxi, which is a coaster that has kind of become a meme with coaster enthusiasts for its name, but honestly I've also seen it get rave reviews for being a really fun coaster on a tiny footprint. And I think there are some really good examples of it closer to my home as well. There's Timber in Walibi Alp, which is a coaster that I haven't been on yet, but I would love to ride it one day. It's similarly a very small wooden coaster, although it's slightly bigger than most of these coasters at about 17 meters in height. And there's one example in Europe as well that I have actually been on, which is Twister in Grönalund in Stockholm, which I absolutely love to bits. It's a little bit different from many of the other gravity group mini woodies in a sense that it's much more twisty, because it's trying to make its way through the already very crammed layout of the Grönalund theme park, which is just one of the most compact, if not the most compact theme park I've ever seen. What's especially nuts is that right now they are building a B&M inverted coaster going through the middle of the park. You can look that part up on Google Maps, because it's close to the city center of Stockholm. It's not too hard to find, it's just across the water from there. And it's a really beautiful park, but just looking at it on Google Maps, I'm absolutely flabbergasted how they are going to fit a B&M invert in there. I've seen the plans, and I guess it makes sense, but it's just ridiculous how compact that park is. I know I'm getting very off topic, but I just want to gush about this park for a second. It's so cool. Like for instance, right next to Twister, the Woody, they have this the Jetline, which is a Schwarzkopf coaster, and they also have a bobsled kind of wild mouse coaster there, which just uses the support structure for the Schwarzkopf looping coaster and wiggles its way through the layout of that coaster. If you've ever built scenarios with very limited land in Roller Coaster Tycoon and you had to end up, you know, snaking your coasters' layouts through each other, that's exactly how Gröna Lund feels. I've never seen a theme park which is so essentially Roller Coaster Tycoon in all of its design. It's beautiful, it's amazing, it's also really charming. Highly recommend visiting it if you're ever in Stockholm. But yeah, you have Twister there, which is also a Gravity Group wooden coaster and very similar to this. So with this layout, I just tried to make a very much in the same spirit a layout with a height of somewhat about 14 meters actually only, I believe. A quick pre-drop followed by a turnaround, which many of these wooden coasters do, into a double up there, just popping a little bit of airtime on each of the hills, coming back down and doing some twisty section out and back, and returning with a few more small bunny hops and some twists and turns until you're back in the station. It's not like there's a lot of variety in the layout, as you can see, but really there's only so much you can do with such a small roller coaster. I think the focus of these and what makes them so interesting to me personally is that they really try to make the best out of their very limited stats. And I think it's a great case for why roller coasters don't necessarily have to be large to be good. And maybe this is just kind of a personal preference for me, but I love mini roller coasters, or roller coasters that, you know, do something that big roller coasters are well known for, but on a much smaller scale, because essentially you can still get the same elements and the same enjoyment and even the same forces out of a smaller coaster as you can with a bigger coaster. It just won't be as impressive and the forces won't be as sustained, but it's very much possible. And many of these wooden coasters can yank you out of your chair just as much as a giant wooden coaster does, and sometimes even do much better than bigger wooden coasters. So I really love that. One of my favorite coasters is also the Intamin Megalight, like Piraten at Djurs Sommerland in Denmark, or in Tobu Zoo, Japan, Kawasemi, which are really amazing coasters, and I honestly prefer them over most bigger Intamin mega coasters that I've been on, just because they just make everything out of their tiny layouts. They're very small, they're kind of cute, but they just maximize the amount of airtime that you can get out of it. And just that whole philosophy, and I think these types of wooden coasters have the same kind of philosophy. I don't know, I just like it a lot. It also leads to roller coasters that have no sense of downtime, if you will. I definitely know some bigger roller coasters that at least have some sections where you feel like, you know, you're out of the action for a bit, or you're just moving in between elements. For me personally, and I guess this is kind of a hot take, but for me personally, Expedition G-Force kind of feels like this. I know most roller coaster enthusiasts, definitely Theme Park Review, still bill Expedition G-Force as the best roller coaster in the world, or at least one of the best in the world. But to me, honestly, those moments of downtime where it just has a small straight section or something where you don't quite have the same forces kind of detract from the experience, and I find that some of these smaller coasters just keep up the insanity from beginning to end, which I just love when roller coasters do that. So yeah, I try to make that work a bit with this coaster as well. Now, I'm also going on about the roller coaster itself because really I was mostly inspired for the layout of this coaster. Everything else I'm doing in this video is just the necessary theming and scenery that I need to do to make it pass as a realistic ride. But honestly, the focus here was really on the coaster, so I'm keeping everything quite minimalistic. The station, for instance, is just a simple wooden shed, quite generic. Kind of what I imagine a Walibi vaguely American themed ride would be. It's not, you know, really quite anything. It doesn't specifically have an in-depth story or theming, but just the vague aesthetics of a sort of North American mining town or logging town or something like that. Now, just for realism's sake, I am adding a small transfer table as well, which honestly I was a little bit stressed about for most of me building this ride because I really couldn't figure out how to make this thing work eventually. I'm not sure if my final solution was featured on the video or not, because I start out with just building it from that curve, but I quickly realized that it was impossible to bring the car back from there. So in the end, I just had to resort to building a small switch track here at the end of the station, actually, where the cars could move backwards into the transfer table. Because really, in this super limited space that I moved myself into here, it seems like the only realistic option. I also think I actually made the trains one car shorter because I didn't have space for a larger transfer table, so I just had to, you know, base the length of the train on that as well. But in the end, I think it works out, and it at least makes the coaster feel like it could be real. Another thing that I wanted to do for this coaster is obviously some custom supporting, but because this is a side project and I don't want to get too much into it, and I don't want to do another Usuri Gardens where I just build a giant custom supported wooden coaster, I'm just keeping it very minimal this time around and trying to focus on just the bare basics. I did look a little bit into what gravity group coaster supports tend to look like, because every wooden coaster I've tried to support in Planet Coaster so far was a Great Coasters International coaster, which uses different support structures. I don't know exactly what their different methods are, but it's pretty clear from looking at their coasters that they have different designs for the track and supports. So for this one, I mostly looked at timber to try and get an idea of what to do with the supports, and to try and also see how I can retrofit the already existing supports in the game to my benefit, instead of just building completely new supports from scratch. Because, I mean, I think also these outside supports do give the biggest bang for the buck. It doesn't take that much effort to add some supports onto the already existing in-game supports, but it just makes it look a little bit more realistic. Not to mention that the game does tend to make under-supported wooden coasters. You know, not even for a specific company style, I think it's important to add these extra wooden beams, because it just looks very flimsy if you don't, and the in-game support generation can very often create under-supported wooden coasters. So I don't want to feel like the coaster is barely hanging on by a thread, so I'm at least adding some custom supports to also make it feel a little bit more sturdy. And especially I think these lateral supports on the outside of curves are quite iconic for these kinds of smaller wooden coasters even. So I think for the general aesthetic of the coaster, it's also quite important to add. The biggest addition to the supports, I would say, is actually on the outside here of this curve, where I'm just hooking up to the height of the already existing supports and adding some lateral beams to that as well, which honestly I think there are many ways that you can just save time for this, like for instance building one basic support that you can move around because the whole structure is the same height, and then just connecting the beams in between that. There's often no reason to build every single beam individually. Of course you could do that if you want to have a very specific like detailed support structure as you would see in real life, but I think this is a good compromise where it doesn't take too much time. It might not be exactly how it would look in real life, but it's close enough and reasonable enough that you don't spend too much time working on it. I've seen many people, well, I say many people, but I've seen some people really only rarely build completely, individually placed hand-built wooden supports for coasters in Planet Coaster. And while I have to say it looks amazing and I really respect the work in it, it's honestly something that I don't really have the time and patience to do. And I think you can very well with copy-paste techniques and trying to add to what the supports in the game already offer, you can do things that look almost as good in much less time. So especially because wooden coasters are one of the most time-consuming things to build with all of the support work included, it's something that I feel is a good way to also prevent yourself from being deterred from ever trying a wooden coaster, because it can just seem like such a daunting task if you want to do it and you really want to do it realistically. I mean, it is interesting though, just to get into some really random roller coaster trivia, that in real life I think wooden coasters are also insanely complicated and take a lot of maintenance and work. Compared to steel coasters, for instance, they are cheaper to buy, but mostly because the materials are cheaper. But after that, they have to be constantly maintained, and they constantly have to have their places, their tracks repaired or replaced. So honestly, these things are very complicated beasts, and every single plank and beam has to be in the right place and has to be checked regularly. So these things, honestly, are super complicated, and I know I'm a roller coaster enthusiast in a sense, and I'll ride roller coasters because I love the thrill of it, but I also really respect the engineering of it, and especially with wooden coasters, the sheer amount of work that goes into, well, making it all work is really absurd. And just playing a video game and making roller coasters in that is really the easiest part that you can imagine. And the real life situation is just so much more insanely complex. But yeah, I'm gonna go back to the world of Planet Coaster for a bit. I decided to add some beams here as well, which I'll be honest, maybe a little bit unnecessary, but at some points I just figured I really like the look of these beams added on the outside of curves, so I ended up just going with it. Another thing to keep in mind, of course, when you're supporting a wooden coaster is that you really have to be sure that your layout is entirely in place and it's as smooth as you want to. For this coaster, I kind of lost my patience at some point smoothing it, and I figured might as well just start adding some supports. But at this point, there's no going back. As soon as you smooth anything a little bit, it'll be ever so slightly out of touch with the supports around it, and everything won't work anymore. So yeah, you really have to be careful with that. It's pretty much all set in stone once you start building the supports. So here's the transfer table, which I'm keeping very simple and not really adding too much in the way of mechanisms to. It's slightly slanted because the track over here is actually slightly slanted as well, because it is going down into the station after all. I think wooden coasters are one of the coaster types where the fact that straight coaster track does not exist becomes very clear. Obviously, games like Roller Coaster Tycoon and the like have made the idea that you have straight sections on roller coasters kind of a generally accepted idea, but in reality, coasters will almost always be on a slight incline, and especially with older coasters and wooden coasters, they will always be on an incline even in the station. And I think with some of these gravity group wooden coasters, you can tell it very clearly that just the whole station is a slant, and the entire brake run leading down into the station is slanted as well. And with many wooden coasters, you can even tell that the brake runs are kind of diagonal. I think gravity group wooden coasters are particularly well known for this. Many of their brake sections are actually banked so that the well, I don't know the exact technical terms, but the way that the brakes work, the fin on the coaster car that has to catch into the brakes and has to be slowing the train down by friction, that has to, I mean, I say friction, but they're usually magnetic brakes. But yeah, it has to be caught right by the brakes. So because of that reason, often the brakes are slightly banked, just so that the magnetic brakes will work. I'm not sure if the same is true for friction brakes, so I shouldn't say anything about it. But point in case is, on a wooden coaster, you're almost always at least going down or up in some way, and very often not even entirely straight, even if you think you are. So all of that just to say that my final brake run and transfer table is also on a very slight tilt. Now, something that I wanted to try with this coaster, because it is quite generic, and I at least wanted to add some scenery to it. Not to mention, I wanted to make this coaster blueprint friendly as well, so I figured this would be a good way to do that. One thing I wanted to do is add some very generic planters around it to kind of give it some landscaping without having to rely on terraforming, which of course doesn't translate with a blueprint. And my idea for that was just to build some large planters that kind of follow the smooth flowing layout of the coaster itself, which was honestly slightly annoying to place, but for those who are watching this and have never heard or seen my trick for this, usually what I do is I get one of those half walls where the top is a half wall section and the bottom is a full wall. I think they're meant for large windows, but honestly I'm not entirely sure what those pieces are for. But if you sink it into the ground so that only the half wall section is above the ground, what you get is a piece that when you rotate it, it'll always be completely flush with itself. Like it'll rotate in a way that you don't have to replace it in any way or move it around in a 3D space to try and connect the next wall to the last one. All you have to do is rotate it in the direction that you want to go, shift it out of the wall that you're currently in, and it'll automatically be flush with the wall that you built before it. And it just makes it way easier to build these kind of round shapes. You never have to try and fiddle with the pieces to make them connect right, and it just kind of makes them fun almost. Of course, it's still kind of a grueling task because you have to place many different small wall pieces to create these curves, and you have to try and get the curves to be as smooth as possible, and of course fill it in with some mulch as well, like I'm doing here. But at the end of the day, it's a much easier way to do these kinds of things, and it's surprisingly fun, I think, to build these curved wall sections, especially because I feel it looks so out of the game, because the game doesn't really offer any pieces like this that are so round out of the box. And yeah, it just makes everything look a bit more smooth, and they're always great to make, especially modern themed builds come together landscaping wise. Now, I'm not entirely sure why I decided to build this whole section on a concrete pad, but I figured it would be good to have a small backstage section where I'm storing all kinds of roller coaster goodies and where the staff will be working. So that's really all that's out here. A little bit of machinery for the transfer table, some leftover crates and pallets and storage stuff. Nothing too special. Also a door so that you can actually get into the lower section of the transfer table there, which maybe shouldn't even have had a floor to begin with, but I mean, I'm happy keeping it this way. I just wanted to add some very small details that also breathe a sign of life into the game, and make it look like this thing is actually functional. And finally, it was time to also put some foliage into these planters. I didn't want to go too crazy on the colors in here because honestly I'm really bad when it comes to colors and flowers and stuff. You might have noticed I don't do a lot of flowers on my videos, and I've never really done that because I'm not the greatest at making good flower arrangements. So I'm just keeping everything very simple here, focusing mostly on green stuff and a few flowers as some colored accents. Not to mention that this does seem like a coaster that would be good for a small, lower budget park, which realistically is where these kinds of coasters are built in real life, and that park could honestly not really afford giant flower beds anyway, so I think it works like this. And finally, I'm really just adding a bunch of context around the ride here to make it feel like it's actually in a map and not just in the middle of nowhere of an empty sandbox. So most of the rest of this video will just be spent adding some forestry around this whole area. There's just one more planter that, you know, when I looked and zoomed out of the map to try and see how everything looked, I felt like something was missing, and it just felt like there had to be something built here on this side to counterbalance all of the other planter shapes, and I figured I might as well add this final section here. Now I want to just fast forward for a second and move to when I finished that planter to discuss a little bit of Pathworks, because kind of like the supports of the wooden coaster, I want to keep the paths as in-game and simple as possible, while at least adding some touches to it to make sure it doesn't look too generic. So I'm leaving the in-game curbs intact. I know some people like to just completely replace the curbs, but honestly, to me that also sounds like a lot of work for only a minor change. And I think especially for a small build like this, it works to just try and see if you can retrofit the curbs in any way. So for the side there, I added some small rope fences. And for these parts, I'm once again doing the half wall trick, except just with a different texture this time around, to try and fill in the connections between the planters. Also, something I think that's worth pointing out is that the planters do have lights, at least on the sections where we don't have these lanterns next to it. Just those small wall lights that shine on the path, which honestly are some of my favorite types of lights to add to any path. It's so simple, you just sink the lights into the walls on the sides, and it just creates a really beautiful effect at night. And you don't have to worry about the lighting otherwise. It's very minimalistic, it's something you don't have to think about too much. But it works out really beautifully, especially with these kinds of minimalistic modern architecture builds. I know there isn't a lot of architecture in this, but I imagine that these kinds of round concrete planters could work very well with contemporary architecture if you're ever building, you know, that kind of theme park. But yeah, the rest of this video is really all just the boring building tree lines, which I've done many times before. It's funny how, to me at this point, it kind of feels like I'm going back to the days of Planet Coaster College, because this is what I would always used to do with the layouts of the coasters once I was finished. Just build a giant tree line around the map that isn't necessarily realistic, because this is of course not how a real forest would look, but it's the kind of thing that I think from a distance looks realistic quite quickly without too much effort. By stacking all of these trees in multiple layers, but within a very tight space, you can very quickly make the outside world invisible, while making it seem like there's actually a very dense and complex forest. When in reality, it's really just a wall of trees that quickly blocks the outside view. So nothing too realistic there, honestly. But yeah, I'm gonna keep a few secrets of this build for the final cinematics as well, so I'm gonna skip forward and let you guys just enjoy some cinematic shots and the POV of this coaster. Hope you guys enjoyed this random little Planet Coaster video. I'll be working on perhaps some Planet Coaster stuff in the future as well. I definitely don't want to leave this game behind. I know many people are thinking about, you know, whether I'm really coming back to this game, because honestly, the problem is that there are many games on my mind, but Planet Coaster will always be the game that made my channel what it is today, I suppose. And ultimately, it's also where my heart lies with theme parks and everything. So, who knows? I have no idea when or what my next Planet Coaster venture is going to be. But ultimately, there will probably be some times when I feel like just making a small side project roller coaster. Anyway, I'll leave you guys. Thanks for watching, and we'll see each other in the next video, I guess.